First, I'll begin with paying my gratitude and salutes to the brave heart of Nagrota encounter yesterday, in which 4 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists were killed, and a very brave display of heroic action by the Jammu and Kashmir security forces. Salutes to them, hats off to them. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Today, we are discussing the topic of Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir in 1947. Okay. Pakistan invaded Kashmir in October 1947. Now, this is a more or less forgotten episode in the entire geopolitical or the history of militancy of Jammu and Kashmir. We hardly talk about it. But that was an event where lies the genesis or the root cause of the problem. Okay. Today, we are joined by our esteemed panelists, which include Lieutenant General Ata Hasnan, who is the former co-commander of Kashmir and current chancellor of the Central University of Kashmir, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, and Distinguished Fellow, VIF. Professor Amitabh Mattu, he is the Professor of Disarmament Studies at JNU and Honorary Professor at Melbourne University and the former advisor to the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Mir Junaid will be joining us soon. He is the President of Jammu and Kashmir Workers' Party. And Dr. Michael Kugelman, he will be joining us at around 9, and he is Deputy Director, Asia Program, Woodrow Wilson Center. So before I invite Lieutenant General Ata Hasnan, I would just like to give a brief narration or a background of what we are talking today. Major General Akbar Khan has written a nice book, Raiders of Kashmir, in which he begins with his preface with the following lines. Nehru called us raiders. He did so in derogatory sense, but what he did not know was that raiding is nowadays an accepted and a very highly developed branch of the art of war. Aircraft commandos, guerrillas, motorized infantry, tank-cum artillery groups, submarines, and even gentlemen of the cloak and dagger tradition are all increasingly used for hit-and-run tactics to achieve the objects of war. Besides, as raiders, we may perhaps also qualify for sitting in that distinguished gallery of personalities like Genghis Khan, Taimur Lung, Mahmud of Ghazni, and even Alexander, whom some historians call raiders. Find a very brilliant acceptance of the fact that they raided Kashmir. Then Major General Akbar Khan also says that Kashmir was the part of the original idea of Pakistan. The word K represents Kashmir. He writes that since 75% of the 4 million inhabitants of Kashmir are Muslims, Kashmir had to be in Pakistan. Then he says that there was a meeting of armed forces partition committee with Muhammad Ali Jinnah, where Mr. Jinnah openly said that I am apprehensive about the actions of and the intentions of Maharaja Hari Singh and also Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, the popular leader of Kashmir, because both of them wanted to join India. Then he said that these two people cannot prevent us from integrating or occupying Kashmir. And then the raiders were sent. Intentions are clear from the very beginning. And today, still the same phenomena is continuing. Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and other groups, all those terrorists are still entering into Kashmir, breaking the peace and the serenity of the valley. So today we are going to discuss that. I will Lieutenant General Ata Hasnan, sir, to share his thoughts and views on that darkest hour of Kashmir, the Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir in 1947. I will also request all the participants to please mute themselves. Only the speakers who are speaking are requested to mute themselves when they speak. The rest of the participants are requested to mute themselves. Ata Hasnan, sir, please.
Thank you very much, Abhishek. Thank you very much, Anna. And a pleasure to be a part of your great initiative, and wonderful to see such familiar faces, great friends, colleagues, mentors, seniors, everyone here. A great initiative, I'm saying why? Because I do believe that the story of Kashmir needs to be retold. And I was very happy that on the 26th of October this year, I was invited to speak, even it had to be by virtual means, at the SKICC, and talk about what is actually the Black Day. Because so far, the narrative which has been put out by Pakistan to the world and believed by the world very largely is that the Black Day is actually 26th, when the instrument of accession was signed by the Maharaja of Kashmir. And we know the various other labels which are given to 27th of October and similar such days. The problem is that we have been over a period of time. How much time do we have? How much time can I have? Sorry, can you just unmute yourself?
Sir, about 10 to 12, 13, 15 minutes.
Okay, absolutely fine. That's good.
Question and answer session. Okay.
Yeah. So what I want to say is that we as a nation, we are a rather innocent nation. We are honest. We are truthful. We like to tell the world as we see things, but we don't realize that people around us are not like us. A lot of people tell different things. They make narratives which are there to suit them, to suit their own situations and suit what the world wants to hear sometimes. And as a result of this, over the last 70 years, this whole story of 1947-48 has been told in a particular way to the world. And we have not cared to correct that perception. We have always thought that that is something of history. Why does it make a difference to anything today? We need to move with the times today. That is the unfortunate thing. The unfortunate aspect is that the world lives with the narratives which have been created over a period of time. And the narrative which has been created about Kashmir is that it's a Muslim dominated state, a Muslim majority state. It was a natural thing that it would have been a part of Pakistan because Pakistan was supposed to be the Islamic nation. The territory was contiguous to Pakistan, territory which was created for it. K was a part of the overall PAK. And these are all the kind of things which have been put out. And also that the Indian nation, the Indian leadership, the Indian army moved in by force, by coercion, forced the Maharaja of Kashmir to sign the instrument of accession. The next morning, to make it look legitimate, they only moved in the troops after the instrument of accession had been signed, and on the 27th of October moved to Srinagar and thereafter took over Kashmir. And therefore, this part of Kashmir actually is illegitimately with India. That is the narrative which you hear most places in the world. And the fact also that from 1948 to 1972 or 71-72, Pakistan made efforts to change, to force the pace by use of force. 1965 in particular, 71 we know is different, 89, 99 subsequently. All these efforts were made by Pakistan to change the entire thing by force, to try and capture Kashmir by force. And despite that, they insist that they would always want to implement the UN resolution. Now, most of the world tends to ask us Indians, why are you so hesitant about implementing the UN resolution? How many places have we ever told this? How much have we ever been able to explain our narrative that history has overtaken the UN resolution of 1948-49, all the resolutions of 48-49, simply because Pakistan attempted to change everything by force. That's the narrative that we believe in today, and that's the narrative we need to put out. Right? But people don't hear that, except for a few countries who support us. A very large number of countries, the nations, may still believe us, but a lot of people don't believe us. A lot of people continue to believe in Pakistan's narratives. So it's important that this decision, which has been taken by a lot of people in India, institutions and individuals, to change the narrative and speak the truth, it is very, very important. I start with that. Now, there's no doubt that this whole narrative does not start from 26th of October. It starts from the 22nd of October. It starts much before 22nd of October, actually. General Akbar Khan, in his book, Raiders of Kashmir, also brings out the fact that preparations, that anticipation and appreciation that there would be a problem in Kashmir had already been made as early as maybe June or even before that. Those who were going to be a part of the Pakistan army were obviously looking at these aspects with a very focused eye. And therefore, preparations for this kind of a situation were already on. They were also very, very clear about one fact, that the territory of Jammu and Kashmir was a hugely strategic territory for both Pakistan and India. It's connect to Central Asia, it's connect to China. This part of the world is a very, very important part. We have known it historically, the Great Game. If you remember the Great Game which was played out in this region, people who have all served in Afghanistan and Central Asia are all very, very familiar with it. So there was no way that Pakistan wanted to lose this territory, whether it is a Hindu majority or a Muslim majority or anyway, they wanted this territory because they knew that it is going to make a strategic difference to them. So the preparations were already there, and they knew very well that the creation of a Pakistan army would take time. By the time a real professional force could be put together, because India as a rump element would still have the main Indian army, the British Indian army would be there. They would still be in a cogent kind of a organized structure, but the new Pakistan army which was being created would not have that privilege at that time. So they ensured that they went into harnessing the resources, the existing resources of the tribals from the tribal areas, struck a deal with them, and that's how this whole thing started in the third week of October, taking India completely by surprise. You should remember that the so-called standstill agreements, etc., were all in the process of being negotiated at that time, and the entire thing was taken by surprise. On 22nd October, they decided, the whole thing had been worked out, the plan as far as Muzaffarabad was concerned, the creation of the Lashkars had all been done. I remember that General Akbar Khan in his book puts it down that the plan was 6 Lashkars were to advance along the Muzaffarabad, Dumail, Uri, Baramulla, Srinagar road. Subsequently, they were to go in and block the Banihal Pass, the gateway to Kashmir from India, so that through the winter, nothing could move into the valley from that direction. 2 Lashkars were to advance along the Hajipir Pass to Gulmarg to secure the southern flank of the main offensive. 2 Lashkars were to advance towards Titwal, Nastachun Pass, Sopor, and come on to Handwara from the northern side. And 10 Lashkars were to capture Punch and Rajouri and then advance towards Jammu. And the Pakistan 7th Infantry Division, which was the only cogent force at that time, was to concentrate in the Murri-Abbottabad area, ready to exploit wherever the major success would be achieved. So it was an absolutely professional plan. It was not as if the tribals had just been told, go in, given some weapons and told to go in and do something about it. Also, hardly known to the world is the fact that the tribals used pillage, plunder, rape as a weapon, as an instrument here. The weapon which they used against the very population which Pakistan was attempting to cajole and take over. This has hardly been written about and hardly been spoken. The tragedy of Uri, the tragedy of the area between Uri and Baramulla, the tragedy of Baramulla itself, hardly been recorded. The way the convent was raided and plundered, the nuns were raped, and in the middle of that, the fantastic bit of patriotism displayed by Maqbool Sherwani is hardly known in India, except for the very fact that in the Indian Army we have a unit which is called 2nd Jackalai Sherwani. It's only in the army that, and even in the army, perhaps very few people know about it. The Jackalai definitely knows about it, but very few people know this. Also, many other heroes who were part of this entire thing is not known. The great battles that were fought by the Maharaja's forces, with hardly any troops available between Uri and Baramulla. Subsequently, between Baramulla and Srinagar. Then the decision to sign the instrument of accession, and the final decision to bring this unit first Sikh on the 27th of October, which is also treated by us today as a very, very important day in the Indian Army. 27th of October, bringing first Sikh in, and then the push to get the Kabbalis out, the tribals out of Kashmir, out of different other areas, Naushera, Punch, etc. This campaign took the better part of 1 year. Through this 1 year, tremendous acts of heroism, the Battle of Zojilla, the battle in Ladakh, the battle in Skardu, or rather in Gilgit, down south in the area of Poonch, some great battles were fought. And after 1 year, finally, a ceasefire was arranged. Now, the last bit which I want to mention here is a lot of people are very, very critical about the ceasefire. A lot of people are very critical about the decisions not to continue with the war and capture the whole of Jammu and Kashmir. I will be always willing to answer questions of a military nature on this particular aspect and not a political nature. Because I do want to outline that we captured some very crucial areas. We captured, for example, we captured Hajipir. We moved from the direction of Hajipir to Poonch. The advance towards Poonch was made from Hajipir itself. We captured the Pir Panjal features in front of south of Uri, very, very famous features called Pir Khati, Lady Gully, etc. But we had to return. Subsequently, we had to vacate them because of a very, very severe winter and not having the amount of equipment which was required, winter clothing, etc., required to hold that particular area. Recapturing that was almost very, very difficult because focus and attention had to shift to other areas like Titwal and Zojilla and places like that. But could we have continued and captured Muzaffarabad? That's $1 million question, which I'm sure someone else may like to attempt to answer. At the end, I will try to answer it if someone is still interested in asking me that question. So at the end of my intervention here, what I want to say is tremendous atrocities on the very people who Pakistan wanted to win over and actually make as a part of their own nation. What was the strategy? One doesn't know. Why did they want to do this kind of a thing? And the story, which is told out in the form of a narrative, is a set of lies which has been told to the world, and the world continues to believe that. What do we need to know? What do we need to do to change this narrative to show that actually India went in there on a legitimate claim to Jammu and Kashmir, on a legitimate historical claim, a legitimate demographic claim, and that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir belongs to India exactly because legally the instrument of accession which was signed by the Maharaja of Kashmir so states so. I think I will stop here and listen to others now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for taking us back into the history. Our generation has never been told this side of the Kashmir conflict. I mean, we have heard, but not in these details. Certainly, we'll get back to you with our questions. But before that, I'll invite Professor Amitabh Machu to come and share his thoughts on the subject.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this extremely important seminar, and which tries to recreate and rediscover this lost narrative as you described it. And I think General Atta Hasnan has very cogently and clearly described it from a military perspective, as well as contextualizing it within the larger politics of that period. What I thought I'll do as a way of complementing what General Saab has said, and as a way of perhaps striking a different, lesser known chord, is to look at the people's resistance. I mean, General Atta Hasnan referred tangentially to it, but I think it's important to also recover and remember that tradition at a time when we are grappling with all sorts of contradictions, is to remember the people's resistance against what was described as the Kabali raid, but which, as Major Akbar Khan and others have pointed out, was really a raid of tribal invaders, aided, abetted, and assisted by the Pakistani army in almost every fashion possible. If you remember that before the Indian army actually landed in Kashmir, it was the volunteers from civil society who passionately, voluntarily, and without any material incentive, trained themselves in the use of firearms to resist the Kabalis. Men, women, even teenagers, including Maqbul Sherani, who was all of 19, were part of this militia. I speak from a deep personal knowledge of this, given that both my aunts, for instance, were part of the Women's Peace Corps, which was led by Zuni Begum and Miss Mahmood Ali Shah. Miss Mahmood Ali Shah, of course, later on became the principal of the Women's College here and received a Padma Shri. But it's important to remember that before the Indian Army repelled the invaders in the famous Battle of Shalteng, which is a few kilometers away from Srinagar, it was this civil resistance which prevented an onslaught on Srinagar, and Srinagar could have experienced on a much more massive scale what had happened in Baramulla, and especially in the convent of St. Joseph's, which General Atta Hasnan has described. My maternal uncle was also a part of the militia, and he would often recount in our homes the slogans that reverberated in the streets and throughout the valley. Hamlavar, Khabardar, Hum Kashmiri Hain Tayyar. And also, lesser known, this Hamlavar, Khabardar, Hum Kashmiri Hain Tayyar has been popularized, but lesser known is Kadam Kadam Badhenge Hum, Mahaz Par Ladenge Hum. Mahaz is the frontiers, the borders. Kadam Kadam Badhenge Hum, Mahaz Par Ladenge Hum, लुटेरे और हमलावरों के साथ वतन फरोश बेवफा और कातिलों के साथ. These were Kashmiris, led by Kashmiris of different classes, from different faiths, irrespective of gender, who were there, out there, fighting the tribal invaders. And the people who died, often unsung and remembered, including Makbul Sherwani, included people from all faiths, Pushkar Zadhu, Sikhs, Christians, every denomination that you can think of was had casualties within that civilian resistance. And of course, as General Atta Hasnan reminded us, one of those ordinary people whose extraordinary bravery and whose audacity and cleverness was responsible for saving Srinagar was Makbul Sherwani. And apart from this memory that is remembered within the Jacklite, Sherwani's name is unsung. At one stage, the Residency Road in Srinagar was named after Makbul Sherwani. No longer. I mean, it may still be on the official records, but everyone knows Residency Road by the British Residency Road rather than by Makbul Sherwani's name. And it is his life and legacy that I want to emphasize again today. It is a life that I believe should be a source of enduring inspiration for us and needs to be mainstreamed throughout the country. I believe that part of what the Vivekanand Foundation, part of what you are doing, should be that every part of India should carry a chapter on the life and times of Makbul Sherwani, because this is not alternative history. This is the history which every Indian should grow up with, that there were Kashmiris in the front line of the resistance against the Pakistani invaders. In fact, if there's one person who deserves national recognition through award, it's Makbul Sherwani. There are three accounts of Makbul Sherwani's life, which one was by Margaret Bourke-White, who was Life magazine's correspondent, then was by Mulk Raj Anand, who actually wrote a book on his life, and Margaret Bourke-White actually visited Kashmir contemporaneously and went to Baramulla and saw that the myth of Makbul Sherwani was as big as the myth of, say, Robin Hood in England. And he was seen as a champion of the oppressed and the peasant. And as almost single-handedly, he was part of the National Congress, he managed to delay, through guile, false rumors, and plain Kashmiri charm, the Pakistani-backed tribal invaders before the arrival of the Indian Armed Forces. And he, as a consequence of this, was crucified, shot and crucified. Earlier on, people don't remember that Makbul Sherwani was the one individual who had disrupted the Muhammad Ali Jinnah's rally in Srinagar, along with other National Conference workers, and Jinnah was not allowed to speak. And as I said, as a consequence of this, the Kabalis found him out, tortured him, shot him and crucified him, but not before he cried out. And there are eyewitness accounts which say this. one last time he said, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh Itihad, Zindabad, victory for the unity of Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims. A few days later, Mahatma Gandhi, who was conducting his prayer meeting in Birla House in Delhi, said, this was a martyrdom of which anyone, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, or any other would be proud. And as Margaret Bourke-White pointed out, here was a young Muslim shopkeeper who had sacrificed his life rather than recant in his creed of religious tolerance. His martyrdom had taken place almost under the shadow of the convent walls, and in the memory of the devoted Kashmiris, he was fast assuming the stature of a saint. But unfortunately, the legend, the story of Maqbool Sherwani, as I keep emphasizing, is forgotten even within the cognoscenti of Baramulla, because this fearless son of Baramulla is today who represented at one stage Kashmiri's unequivocal faith in the ideals of India. Today, his memory is lost, and that's why I think it's important that while we recreate the narrative, while we bring to light all the tactics adopted by Pakistan, it's important to recognize the more earthy local heroes who were part of the Indian resistance in Kashmir, who fought the Pakistani tribal invaders much before the Indian army landed there in that crucial period between 22nd October and the 26th of October. These 4 days, it was the civilian resistance which prevented Srinagar from collapsing before the Kabalis. Almost all other accounts of Sherwani, and I have done significant amount of research on this, suggest that his commitment to religious tolerance, his commitment to the idea of India, and his ability to misguide the tribal invaders had become a part of the legend of Kashmir at that stage. But of course, now, as General Atta Hasnan said, and as I keep emphasizing, it's forgotten. What does Maqbool Sherwani represent, and why do I think that it's important that we recreate and rejuvenate and recover that memory? One, of course, is the inspiring story of Maqbool Sherwani's individual bravery. Here is a story of a teenager, 19-year-old, who's out of the box thinking, and courage and commitment is an example of real bravery. In the billboard of the army cantonment just outside Baramulla, he is described as Kashmir's Bhagat Singh. And indeed, he was a young man of exemplary courage. But beyond that, he knew what he stood for and was not fuzzy about who the enemy was. The second is the idea of Maqbool Sherwani, whose ideas were rooted in the inclusiveness of Kashmiri society and community. What he fought was for the unity of all faiths against the two-nation theory. As I said, he had disrupted the Jinnah's rally. Later on, he kept emphasizing Hindu, Muslim, Sikh Itihad. It's this legacy of that strength of that idea which again needs to be recreated. Finally, Maqbool Sherwani represented the idea of an egalitarian, humane, non-feudal and democratic Kashmir, which we are talking about, which the Prime Minister is talking about, which all our intellectual leaders talk about. How do we actually recreate a non-feudal, democratic society in Kashmir in which the ordinary Kashmiri is empowered? It would be the greatest tribute to Sherwani's martyrdom, nearly 75 years after his death, if we were to work together to recreate that idea which Sherwani had fought for and died for. In other words, the 22nd of October is a black day in the history of the subcontinent. It was a day on which Pakistan indulged in the greatest perfidy and sent in tribal invaders. But what the challenge before us is to recreate that sense of hope, that sense of belief, that sense of inclusiveness that existed within civil society in Jammu and Kashmir, even as we laud the bravery of the Indian Armed Forces. Again and again, I think it's important that we recognize the unsung Kashmiris. And I see that there are voices here who know and have often spoken for the unsung Kashmiri, like C.D. Sahai Saab and others. I think it's important that at this time, which is the point in some ways of many transitions and of many contradictions, that we, while we remember 22nd October, we also remember these brave young men and women. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mattu. Thank you. You literally times of 1947 and made us really aware of those things. So I'll invite Amir. I think he has not joined. He'll be joining. Yes, just for Mr. Junaid is having some issues joining. I'll just sort it out. But before that, we can take up a question. I'll just read out the question here.
Sahai Saab to say something. I think it's
Yes. Okay. Sahai sir, can you hear me? Hello. Sahai sir?
He's on mute. Sahai Saab, can you hear us?
Ji, Professor Saab.
Yes, sir. So we would like to hear your thoughts.
On a lighter vein, अब तो प्रोफेसर बनना बंद किए, जो कि बैक रो में कोई स्टूडेंट बैठा हुआ है, उसी को उठा करके कह देते हैं कि बोलना शुरू करो. हाँ, ये प्रोफेसर के स्टाइल है, मेरे ऊपर क्यों लगा रहे हैं? But thank you very much, Abhinav, and it was nice hearing both General Atas and Professor Saab, Professor Mattu, for whom I have great regard. And right from the time I started learning, taking the first few baby steps about Kashmir, in Kashmir, and what was happening. Now, this seminar, I had no idea that when it was proposed, when I got the invite, I had no idea that an entirely new dimension of what has been not heard or talked about the history of Kashmir, the idea of Kashmir. Yes, more than history, the idea of Kashmir, and it was very revealing. I wish I didn't have in between some domestic distractions, and I could have possibly sat through the whole thing. But the conflict in my mind is where do we go from here, and what do we do? We are so much taken up with with virtually the daily events and the new ideas being unfolded, the new initiatives being taken, that there is hardly any time to sit back and reflect. I'm not complaining because when I was there in Kashmir, 93, 95, and then sort of continued dealing with it for the next 10 years. And even after retirement for the last 15 years, Kashmir continue to live with Kashmir. And I'm not complaining about the daily initiatives. In fact, this is what was missing all these years. We took some few steps and then retracted. We took a few more, and there was a hope that from 1996 onwards, those steps will continue to be taken, and a clear direction will be defined where we wish to take Kashmir. Whether we reach there or not was not a matter of concern at that stage, nor should it be at this stage. Eventually, we got to reach somewhere, And for that, we have charted a course where we want to go and we want to walk. There would be a lot of stumbling blocks all the time and everywhere, um, uh, and mostly from known quarters. That is something which is a redeeming sort of thought that we know exactly who wants what, and we know who's serious about it. We know who has what their individual and group agendas are. So, uh, in this seminar, a lot of those ideas have been thrown, and maybe those could also be assembled together into the building blocks which are put there. Kashmir is not going to be resolved soon. It will hopefully get resolved sooner than expected, though, and that's my hope and my wish. At least, I mean, in our lifetime, this should be resolved, and it can be done. And there are recent indications are that there is a determined effort, and I'm not talking in with any political overtones in that. I'm talking genuinely about the way the Kashmiris have started feeling about the large number of people who want to move on. There are there's an increasing number of people who consider have started believing that right to life is perhaps more precious, why perhaps it definitely takes precedence over all other rights that human beings can have. There are also, unfortunately, a growing number of people who are taking advantage of this situation of and of uncertainty and trying to Kashmir take away from its traditional Sufi traditions, which most Kashmiris, and I'm happy about that, still are wedded to and have that very close to their heart. I can go on, and I don't wish to because the purpose of this seminar is something else. But I would be I would request Abhinav and his friends to now start talking also about serious discussion about putting options on the table, and discussing it in a free and open atmosphere, which institutions like yours can do very conveniently. And this, you have done it on other issues, and I have attended some of your programs, which have drawn good new ideas, brought them on the table. Um in case of Kashmir, also, I suppose there is a time has come that we actually pick up the good ideas, the good suggestions, the good memories that we have of Kashmir and where we want to go, put them all together, put it in churning pot, and try to evolve uh, ideas which could guide the decision makers, and not only the decision makers, the opinion makers. I think they should play a much stronger role in Kashmir. And one should not get, and Professor Saab and we have been in a few programs where invariably we end up talking about Pakistan or this, that, and the other. Those elements will always remain there, and so will Kashmir, and so will be these ideas which are coming up. I wish the program and more of these types to happen, not only here at this forum, but in many forums, and so that we can again start uh, mobilizing the intelligentsia and the thinking community, the community who have Kashmir in their heart and not only in their pens and minds, but in the heart. And that is very important to put our hearts together and before putting our heads together into finding a resolution or at least some way forward for the Kashmir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your thoughts. It's always a very blissful experience learning from your experiences. I'll definitely take up your suggestions and get more youth members of the Kashmir to discuss the possible options in the future. Today we have Mir Junaid Saab. He is a upcoming and a vibrant, dynamic, new age politician of Kashmir. Junaid Saab has joined. Junaid Saab, please unmute yourself. Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
I can
Hello?
hear you. Can you?
Okay. Sir, welcome to Usana's Foundation's webinar. So today we discussed about the 1947 invasion of Pakistan on Kashmir. Kashmir was a place where Mahatma Gandhi saw the light. The entire India was burning in the fires of communal riots, but Kashmir was peaceful. Kashmiris, as Professor Mattu Sahab said, chanted, "Hum Kashmiri hain tayyar, dushman khabardar." So we want to know, what does an average Kashmiri thinks about the 1947 invasion today? Like, what happened to Kashmir like all this while? Why this whole poisoned narrative is dominating their minds today? Please share your thoughts.
First of all, very greeting to everyone
You're
watching.
not audible, Junaid Saab, Please, you have to.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible. I guess you have internet problems.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Please.
Good evening to everyone, watching this live webinar organized by Usana's Foundation. I'm delighted and honored to be a part of this wonderful discussion.
Junaid
And
sir, there is a lot of noise coming from your background. If you can sit in a quiet place, I guess you will be more audible. No?
no,
Yeah.
no,
Yes. Yeah, it's better now. It's perfectly.
is it perfectly all right now?
Yeah, it's all right now. It's all right. Yes, yes.
Am, am I audible?
Yes, well, please, sir, carry on. Yeah.
See, the theme of today's discussion is something that actually needs to be discussed more often for the understanding of Kashmir issue. You see, I and the generations that follow me, especially in Kashmir, are made to hear the legends of the past, and no one in Kashmir seems to dwell too deep into the historic background of the Pakistani invasion and the accession of J&K to the Union of India. You see, the educated section of Jammu and Kashmir seems to have just turned a blind eye to the history of J&K. There are, many loopholes in set narrative around the history and reality of Jammu and Kashmir in the society itself. The younger generations are the progeny of a generation that was at war with India. And the previous generations had fallen prey to the nefarious designs of Pakistan and given up the harmonious and peaceful atmosphere of the valley in the greed of an unachievable goals which was wrongly themed as Azadi. You see, historically, Jammu and Kashmir was sold by the Britishers after defeating Sikhs and sold to Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Gulab Singh, for an amount of 75 lakh rupees. Many people use this argument to separate the identity of Jammu and Kashmir from the rest of India. And the primary reason for British sale of J&K to Gulab Singh was not the separate identity of Jammu and Kashmir, but the need of Britishers to keep buffer states between their boundaries and those of other imperial powers. You see, India in its long history has not had a unified outlook, and rarely kings have been able to establish an all India rule due to the size of country. Yeah, if we'll go a little back in the medieval times, J&K became it became a part of Mughal India in the year 1586, and many Mughal kings visited the place for passing their time in pleasure. And then the people of Jammu and Kashmir, after the Mughal rule, came under the uh, tyrannous rule of Afghans, followed by Sikhs of Punjab, and then the Dogras from Jammu. The life of Kashmiri was poor and filled with scarcity of resources to make the ends meet during the three regimes I mentioned. And the introduction of education in Kashmir led to the growth of knowledge and political conscientiousness among few people who started demanding political rights from the monarchy. You see, these events can put in the time frame of 1925. Jammu and Kashmir was vocal for its rights, and Muslim Conference came up as a party to represent the voices of the voiceless commoner. The name Muslim might give us an idea that this was a Muslim favoring organization which came to the mind of Sheikh Abdullah as well as he went on to step the National Conference. And you see, the name was chosen to do away with the use of religion in the domain of political politics in order to make the political sphere within JNK more inclusive and as well as often for all. This name change, you have to understand, signifies many things, and among them the most significant is the diversity of Jammu and Kashmir. If we'll go a little back, the Radcliffe lines, that was drawn by the British and showed the geographic limits of both the dominions, showed JNK as a part of India. This was not expected by Pakistan. Kashmir was something that Jinnah thought he had in his pocket. The politics in JNK was increasingly demanding democracy and liberty from the monarch, who was reluctant to let go of power in the region he thought was his property. The erstwhile JNK princely state was a mixture of races, religions, languages, and cultures. The population might have been majorly Muslims, but the essence of society was multicultural in its core. And this demography multicultural existence naturally made Denmark suitable as a part of India. You see, uh, Pakistan had openly announced itself as a religiously drawn out state with space only for Muslims. And JNK never was a space for Muslims only. It had a tradition of Sufism. We lived together with respect and love for each other's faiths. And the leader of Pakistan, Mr. Jinnah, had made a visit to Kashmir and received a lukewarm, I repeat, received a lukewarm response as people were following Sheikh Abdullah as their leader. It's and pertinent to mention here that JNK saw its future in a diverse and secular country like India. And you see, the accession of the Indian dominion would have been achieved naturally as the political movement was seeking what India provided for its citizens. Right. So, are you listening? Hello.
Yes, we are listening. We are listening. Yes, please carry on. We are listening. Yes.
And then we'll come back to our topic, the tribal attack. You see, that was pre-planned by Pakistan on Jammu and Kashmir was an invasion from which Pakistan did not want any formal association. The reason for this was that Pakistan had just become independent a few months back, and the world community would have bashed Pakistan for its uncivilized and brutal behavior. The tribal invasion was one of the most horrific incidents in the history of Jammu and Kashmir, comparable only to the attack, if we remember, attack by Zulchu in 1353. The mass killings and murders painted the north of Kashmir red. Rapes and molestations were committed in numbers beyond counting. People were crying for help, and the Maharaja was too weak to do anything. This actually forced Maharaja to accede to India, which was only possible help he could have received at that time. And India intervened and saved the rest of JNK from revenging that North Kashmir had witnessed. This accession in such circumstances raises a lot of eyebrows among Pak apologists, but it would have happened either way. But the point of stress here is not the accession for me, but the invasion by Pakistan of J&K. People in J&K seems to have forgotten this history, and Pakistan has been able to change its image from the murderer to a messiah. The narrative shift is one of the most shocking culminations in the contemporary history of the world, and this reversal is actually shocking to me, for a man of reason. In order, you know, to expose the reality of Pakistan. If you remember, if you must have heard, we on 22nd October 2020, we had organized a Black Day observance in Kashmir. This was the first such happening in 70-year long history of Kashmir. We organized a car rally in protest against Pakistan and its policies with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. We had also organized a symposium in collaboration with Ministry of Art and Culture in memories of the attacks of 1947 by Pakistan. I believe the Professor Matusab attended the seminar as well. We then went for a protest march against Pakistan to UN office in Srinagar, where we presented the war crime memorandum against Pakistan, demanding the rest of J&K back from Pakistan, which is a legal and rightful part of India. These horrors, of the day have been erased from the minds of Kashmiris who have been used as proxies by Pakistan. Pakistan's purpose from its inception as a country has been the destruction of India. This the incomplete and unsuccessful invasion of Jammu and Kashmir is the guiding force for Pakistani's, policy on Kashmir. Pakistan, we have to understand, has used its proxies quite smartly over past 30 years by choreographing one of the most brutal insurgencies in the valley. Through its policies, Pakistan was first able to strip Kashmir of its harmonious and plural democratic composition. One of the most inhuman mass exodes happened on the order of Pakistan to their proxies in Kashmir. This move has led to social isolation of Kashmiri Muslims, and the generations that have been born after the exodes have no idea of the plural culture of Kashmir. The social isolation has played a key role in keeping the pot burning in Kashmir, and one of the important reasons for this isolation has been Article 370. The people have made, they have been made to believe that this article is a protection of Kashmiri's identity and dignity. I'm very sorry to see these statements that want a Kashmiri to believe that a Kashmiri identity is a superior identity to that of being an Indian. You see, the past 30 years are the testimony of the failure of the family rule in Jammu and Kashmir, which has led to the isolation and alienation of Kashmiris from their Indian identity. It's saddening to see them talk today of the development that they been able to achieve over these years. I'm sorry to say this, but all this have been done is give boost to corruption and limit the corridors of power to their own selves. And you see, the erstwhile of J&K was always flooded with central grants for development, and these grants have been made use of only for giving space to hollow institutions, which could not take the people's confidence in them. And the corrupt, machinery drove away the people from public offices, and democracy was used to just play musical chairs with the seat of powers between the two families. These families had defined roles when in power and opposition. And you see, the role of power was misgovernance and embezzlement of funds from the center. The role in opposition was to stir public emotion and give legitimacy to the feeling of separatism and treason. We have been dealing with a nexus of political parallelism in Kashmir, where the political mafia kept on deceiving the masses by charging them communally on one side and on the other side asking for money for development from center. This is so shocking. And you see, these people, they have come up together now just to sell a new model of bigotry. I call them wholesale dealers of Kashmir. And with this, I would like to conclude my speech. Uh, Thank you so much.
Junaid Saab, thank you very much. It was wonderful listening, let me tell you. Okay? And Dr. Michael will be joining soon. Before that, we have a question for you from Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who is also a board member. Mr. Trigunayat is asking, may I ask you, how do you assess the current situation in the valley and how do you see the way forward, irrespective of the Pakistani narrative?
See, the only way forward, I mean, you see, the old narrative, I don't call that narrative, I call that was an agenda run by our old own political establishment here. Autonomy was an agenda. Self rule was just to convert separatism into soft separatism. That was an agenda. Independence was obviously by default an agenda. Then you see the only way forward for Jammu and Kashmir right now is to transform Jammu and Kashmir into world-class socio-economic political movement. That's the only solution I see as a way forward to this place. I don't see any way forward apart from this.
Thank you. No, as a researcher, I have also toured a lot in Kashmir, and when I mean various mainstream political parties and some prominent leaders I interacted with. I'm not going to name them. They all said that well, removing Article 370 is a big assault on our identity. But what I found was that the biggest assault on Kashmiri identity was this deep entrenchment and penetration of religious extremism and jihadism over the years. The way Jamaat-e-Islami controls the mindsets, with fear, with terror, that is the biggest assault on Kashmiri identity. Today, why not more and more Kashmiris international voice and protest over what Pakistan is doing? What they are doing in Gilgit Baltistan, they are going to make it a new province. This whole annexation of POK is illegitimate. And why can't more and more Kashmiris come out and they can make a loud, I mean, they can make a noise, or they can be more vocal. What do you feel about it?
See, I mean, we have to understand there are multi dimensions. People really want to come forward and to talk about the way forward. Likewise, I'm talking. The only problem is, like you said, the other country has been continuously intoxicating, venomizing the minds of people of Jammu and Kashmir, and then they have been successfully able to instill imbibe the fear psychosis in the minds of people. See, if a youth or if a common citizen wants to participate in the democratic process where he has no political baggage, he has no baggage of corruption and other things on him, but you know how he's being muzzled. We have a legacy that every sane voice was muzzled with a barrel of AK-47. I mean, that government has to look upon. First, if government is going to give us a peaceful environment, then only these things will happen. Then a common Kashmiri can participate in these kind of programs. Then he can discuss the way forward with you. The moment he tries to, open up and to speak on the lines which I am speaking, where, I had taken a different line. The moment other person thinks of it, the first thing comes in his mind is he fears for life. That that is where we have to pitch in. We all have to pitch in and make the country aware that, for God's sake, first protect almost. I mean, how many nationalists you will find here? True nationalists who are not running agenda. If we're not able to protect 100 people who are from a nationalist band completely, who are not ridden, two horses, we have to protect them, and then things will definitely move forward, because other countries always trying to be a glitch in the democratic participation. They never want the democracy to function smoothly here in Kashmir because it fulfills their global agenda. The moment it fills their global agenda, they will always want the pot of the violence boiling in Kashmir. There are a lot of things, but I don't think the time permits me to speak in detail. We'll discuss these things in next webinar, where if time permits, then I can go beyond this rhetoric.
Thank you very much, Junaid sir. We'll certainly come back with questions, but I would agree with your assessment. This is something which I also felt, the kind of terror which Jamaat-e-Islami has in each and every village, in academic institutions, in the departments, that's terrific. That's beyond imagination. And this feeling of a major obstruction in the coming out of the real, authentic voices of Kashmir in the open. Okay? And I'll welcome Dr. Michael Kugelman. Dr. Michael Kugelman, he is the Deputy Director of Woodrow Wilson Asia program. He has spoken for us in the past, and it's always a delight to learn from his thoughts and his insights on South Asia. Dr. Kugelman, so we discussed about this Pakistan's illegal invasion of Kashmir in 1947, a very, I would say, an unforgotten episode of the Kashmir's history. We talk about militancy, we talk about cross-border terrorism, but why to blame others or the foreign institutions? Even in India, we had almost forgotten it. Okay? So, Lieutenant General Atta Hasnan Sahab told about the details of the invasion, like how the tribal raiders came and they massacred, plundered, and raped people of Kashmir. Professor Amitabh Mattu also detailed about the happenings of 1947. Then Mr. Junaid Mir spoke about what an average Kashmiri feels about today. So we would like to hear your voices. Like in US, a lot of people allege India when it comes to the human rights of Kashmir. But why not questioning this whole illegal occupation and annexation of Kashmir by Pakistan? Okay, the very genesis of the problem. Michael. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you, and I have to apologize to everyone for my late arrival. There were conflicting commitments. I appreciate the organizers allowing me to join late. Look, I think that I could offer a perspective from the U.S. On this issue, and very few people, certainly in government, in the policy world, want to get bogged down in the history of this issue. I think that. The focus, to the extent that it is there from the U.S. government, is on the current situation, and I think there's been a myth that's been put out there by a number of commentators, certainly in Pakistan, but beyond as well, that U.S. policy toward Kashmir changed during the Trump years, and they point to some of the comments that President Trump has made during his term, in which he has several times, 2 or 3 times, I believe, has essentially said that, I would be happy to try to mediate. But I think we all know that it was not a true offer of mediation, in the sense that he had very explicitly said that if both sides asked me to help out or something to that effect, I will then be happy to engage. But we know that Pakistan may want there to be some type of mediation. The other side clearly does not. So to me, it doesn't come across as a mediation offer. And in that sense, the U.S. policy has not changed. And the U.S. policy has generally been to stay out for reasons that I think are clear for all. What's happened over the last few years, what's happened over during the Trump years, and particularly since August 5 of last year, is some level of reaction from certain individuals, particularly from the Democratic Party. As you know, on Capitol Hill, there had been some criticism, some pretty significant criticism of what happened in Kashmir after the revocation of Article 370. And it was very specifically focused not on the dispute or on the actual move to revoke Article 370, but it was focused on what happened afterward. The criticism was very narrowly focused on the communication ban and the detention of leaders, those types of things. So the criticism was couched from a human rights lens. It did not really get into the Article 370 move itself or the Kashmir issue more broadly, and it was limited in scope. It was generally from Democrats on Capitol Hill, as well as some other U.S. government entities not linked to the White House and not linked to the executive branch. So I can say that President Trump has been aware of the tensions in India-Pakistan relations, and he knows the role that Kashmir plays in that. But I think at the end of the day, he really did not, what he said in those few half-hearted comments about mediation did not reflect any type of shift. And I do think that will remain the case. Looking at the incoming administration, I know that there have been some that have thought that an incoming president who has placed such an emphasis on promoting democracy, human rights around the world, that he would be the guy that would try to sort of bring this issue back to the bring it to the front burner of policy. And I really don't see that happening. I do think that he may be more willing to bring it up than his predecessor did in private conversations in terms of human rights conditions in Kashmir. I could certainly see that happening, but it certainly doesn't strike me as a priority for reasons that we could all understand, one being the dynamics of the US-India relationship as well as the Kashmir issue itself. And for all this commentary that suggests that the Biden-Harris campaign, the Biden-Harris team has been focused on this Kashmir issue. In fact, there hasn't been all that much said. I mean, I think that Kamala Harris made a comment that got a lot of attraction, in which she basically said, we're here for Kashmiris after the revocation of Article 370. She said that, and then there was a policy document that the Biden campaign published that I believe was focused on appealing to American Muslims, and it was in that context he laid out this notion that was very critical of the Citizenship Act, the new Citizenship Act, as well as conditions in Kashmir. But both of those examples, I think, I would ascribe more to domestic political factors in the U.S. more than anything else. I mean, it was meant to help get votes. So I think that looking at where things could be going with this administration, the Biden administration is going to take office with the same goal that all U.S. presidents have had since, really since, I guess, Bill Clinton, but especially since George W. Bush, and that is to pursue strategic partnership, try to build out a security partnership with India. It makes good sense. I think that the reasons for it are very compelling. There's bipartisan support for the main drivers of U.S.-India strategic partnership, whether you're talking about concerns about China or you're talking about terrorism concerns or whatever the case may be. So my view is, why would this Biden administration want to veer away from that goal, which has strong bipartisan support, is fervently supported by Biden himself, and anyone that would be on his team, for sure, as well as the vice president? Why would he want to go against that script, against that policy, by trying to focus suddenly on an issue that has never really constituted much concern, particularly on official levels, and is really one that policymakers have tried to, that wouldn't want to get near with a 10-foot pole or an even longer pole as well. So, that said, I just don't think that there is any desire on the part of this incoming administration, as well as previous administrations, to really delve into this dispute. To the sense that it's seen as a concern, it is from a stability lens, and in the sense that Kashmir is an issue that has been the spark for multiple wars, and that if you have an India-Pakistan relationship that is experiencing a lot of problems, as the current one is now, particularly given what happened in February 2019 and then August 2019, this concern that the Kashmir issue could be trigger for some type of broader military crisis or even a conflict between the two states. That's where the concern lies here in Washington when thinking about Kashmir in that context. It's just not it's not a big issue. It's not going to be a priority. This administration will take office with the U.S. facing one of its biggest domestic crises in years, with the pandemic and an economic crisis and a social crisis driven by considerable racial tensions, things like that. Foreign policy on the whole will not even be an initial priority for this administration. I think that when the Biden administration does start to focus on its foreign policy goals in the context of Asia, in the context of South Asia, Afghanistan will be the big focus in terms of how to figure out what to do about the true posture or what the true presence or what's left of it when he takes office. And then India pursuing trying to build on the momentum from the Trump years, trying to figure out how to build out this relationship that has so much momentum. And the Kashmir issue is not going to be even a mid-tier priority. So I imagine that that's an assessment that would disappoint many that have seen this administration as one that can go in a different direction. But I don't really see that to be the case. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I mean, but this is you're right. It's kind of a dampener, or in fact, rather a disappointment that foreign policy, especially when it comes to Kashmir, is not on the cards yet. But I would just like to add in here that I mean, yesterday only there was a like 4 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists infiltrated from the Samba sector in Jammu, and they were killed by the security forces in Nagrota. So, which shows that Pakistan still continues with its policy terror and jihad into Kashmir. And as we saw, like over the last few years, India's policy towards terrorism is different. Like we have like zero tolerance to terror. So if this continues or some sort of Pulwama part 2 happens, then definitely the retaliation is going to be something even bigger. And consider bringing in the factor like of China getting more aggression and the China-Pak alliance, these situations can be very tricky. So don't you think that US cannot afford to ignore this part of the conflict? I mean, it has to take a stand. If we really want to protect the liberal world order, I mean, I'm just talking about big things, but this is certainly a very important constituent of
that. But sure, should I address that briefly? Yeah. No, I think you're right, and the issue of terrorism has always been a big priority for Biden himself. And I found it very interesting. I'm sure that you and others on this call will have seen an op-ed that Biden published in a publication called India West a few weeks back, which I believe is a publication run by Indian Americans. He laid out his vision for the U.S.-India relationship. And what was very interesting about this is that he framed the U.S.-India relationship as, above all, a counterterrorism partnership. Only later did he actually bring up the issue of the two countries working together to counter China. And that goes against how the Trump administration has looked at the U.S.-India relationship, where I think that counterterrorism still has been significant, but it hasn't received the same type of interest as the issue of countering China. I mean, the Trump administration's first national security strategy identified strategic rivalry in China as America's top national security threat. Terrorism was not receiving that treatment anymore. But Biden has indicated that he wants to go back in a different direction and that he does worry about terrorism. And if he's framing the U.S.-India relationship as a counterterrorism partnership, invariably that suggests a considerable concern about the likes of the terror groups that you just mentioned, Jaish and certainly LET as well, and others that are there on Pakistani soil. So I think that one change that we could see, I've talked about continuity in the U.S. approach to India between Trump and Biden. Perhaps one change we could see is Biden taking a bit of a tougher line on Pakistan in terms of dealing more with these jihadist networks in Pakistan, comprised of these India-focused or Kashmir-focused groups. So I imagine that Biden may be one who would want to hold Pakistan's feet to the fire more on certainly on the FATF issues, but those are already being addressed. But more broadly as well, and certainly if you do have another Pulwama-like scenario, the Trump administration was fully behind India after that happened, and including what happened afterward with the Balakot strikes. The Trump administration was fully behind India. You certainly would get that with the Biden administration. And looking at this against the backdrop of this deepening, rapidly growing security partnership between the U.S. and India, the fact that you now have all of these foundational defense agreements in place, including the BECA, the most recent one, which will, I think, make it a lot easier, not easier, it'll strengthen India's capacity to better surveil and monitor the movements and locations of these terror groups. And I think that perhaps the core objective for the United States in concluding the BECA deal with India was to pursue strategic partnership and build out the defense partnership and to put India in a better place to monitor threats from China. But I do think the Pakistan issue was at play there as well. I think that the Trump administration wanted to ensure that India would be able to strengthen its capacity to monitor these Jaish terrorists and others in order to better protect itself. And I think that that's something that the Biden administration would certainly look on favorably as well. So in terms of taking a sign or taking a position on this issue of Pakistan-focused terrorism, I think that you would definitely have that from the Biden administration. This isn't to say that the Biden administration would want to turn on the Pakistanis. I'm sure you know the geopolitical realities with the Afghan peace process being a big priority for first Trump, next for Biden. There's going to be a desire to engage with the Pakistanis on those issues. So Pakistan won't be pushed too hard. But I do think on the issue of terrorism that will be a key focus, a key priority for the Biden administration in the context of its of its interest in the region.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for sharing your insights. Okay. Just would like to share an observation. I mean, it's not that the terrorism Kashmir is an isolated issue. I guess it matters to the US security also, because if America wants India to be like strong, against China, then I think there has to be some kind of stability and some kind of security in Kashmir also, because it's like completely in the interest of China to keep India busy in Kashmir, with all the local problems and all. Okay. So I mean, I would just like to say that it's not something which does not, matter to US in the long run. Considering the larger interest, it's very important. So we have a few questions here. I'll just read out the questions, and now Atta sir is back here. Matu sir is here. Whoever wants to take the question, you can take the question. This question is from Dr. Venkateshwaran. He's saying that India has a strong legal case. It has already successfully put Pakistan on the back foot on terrorism through its diplomatic efforts. Isn't it now an opportunity to take the J&K situation, particularly Pakistan's illegal occupation of Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, global through a diplomatic strategy and seek sanctions? This will only put pressure on Pakistan to prove its legality, which it can't. Who would like to take the question? Matu sir, Atta Hasnan sir?
I'll take it on briefly, and I'll request Amitabh sir to Dr. Amitabh Matu to reinforce or to counter whatever I have said. It's a very interesting question. There's no doubt that first of all, I think what the audience needs to know is that by the 1994, 22nd February 1994 resolution, India put its claim, reclaimed the entire Jammu and Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, Aksai Chin, everything. This was by a parliamentary resolution with all parties pitching in that. That's the weight which this particular thing carries. And now, having abrogated Article 370 and 35A and legally integrated Jammu and Kashmir to a far greater extent, much better extent with the rest of India, yes, your claims over Gilgit-Baltistan and Aksai Chin being reinforced. Is it the right time to go to the international community, sell this idea everywhere around the world and talk about it? Well, only one thing holds you back, if you ask me. It plays into Pakistan's strategy to some extent also. Because Pakistan's strategy is that it is still a United Nations issue. It's still a United Nations issue. It is still listed on the Security Council. India has, by 1972, the Shimla Agreement, signing the Shimla Agreement, the UN resolution has not been decided. But we continue to believe, and this is the narrative we like to play out, which we must reinforce strongly, is that there is an element of bilateralism now involved with Pakistan. Pakistan also signed on the dotted line, and therefore they are equally beholden to it, and therefore it has to be mutually resolved. The whole issue has to be mutually resolved. This is the competing narrative, which we would find difficult to justify if we take this issue internationally in a very big way and play this game out. I'm all for it diplomatically. We need to do it. We need to play India's narrative out, etc. But there has to be a more cogent strategy to do it, which doesn't sort of bounce back on us in any way. Dr. Amitabh Matu may like to add to that.
I would echo what General Atta Hasnan has said, except add the caveat that, look, what does India want to be? I mean, you want to be a global player. You want to be seen as a major player in the international system. So internally, you have integrated Jammu and Kashmir through unprecedented measures taken last year. While you can continue putting Pakistan on the diplomatic defensive, and certainly you should continue putting pressure on Pakistan through the Financial Action Task Force, which deals with money laundering and funding of terrorist activities. I think hyphenation in terms of with Pakistan, particularly in terms of using our diplomatic resources, when those could be deployed elsewhere on larger global issues, I think will only bring out marginal returns. I mean, there's only this much that diplomacy can do and should do. And increasingly, I think people are also beginning to see that India is spending far too much of its diplomatic resources on a country like Pakistan. Frankly speaking, I think if you want to play that larger role within the international system, you should be seen as being more engaged with various think tanks, with various bodies. I mean, I would imagine that the Wilson Center and Michael Kujerman would rather hear about India's positions on many multilateral issues rather than what the strategy would be of an odd congressman who might speak against India. So I think India has to rise above all this. And as General Hassan said, there are also issues which are legal in nature, which I think will be counterproductive, frankly speaking, to embark on a global strategy to try and counter Pakistan. We've countered Pakistan. We don't need to do it, spend more resources globally. I think those resources are best spent on global issues, on projecting India's economic Atmanirbhar story, on actually projecting India as a manufacturing hub, on trying to see how the how supply chains can be deployed in India. So those are the kind of stories that I would rather have Washington hear rather than Indian diplomats just talking about Pakistan. Maybe Michael will respond to that. What would you rather hear? The Indian growth story or an India story of on Gilgit-Baltistan, which you may have heard many times earlier? You need to unmute yourself, Michael.
Sorry about that. I thought I had, but apparently not. No, I think the answer to your question is that, well, we know the answer to the question, that here in Washington, you could argue that things may have changed a little bit in the few months after August 5, but in Washington, both sides of the political aisle, Democrats and Republicans, are very interested in hearing about India and its growth and its evolution into a power. One could, I guess, on some levels, consider it to be a middle power, so to speak. But no, you're not going to get any complaints. You're not going to get many complaints here in Washington, and certainly in the policymaking world, about this notion of India playing a broader role globally, multilaterally. And I know that this has been a priority of your current government, to try to upsize India's role in the world and not just think about it in terms of its relationship with Pakistan, but certainly in terms of cold hard interest here in the U.S. Stability is the core U.S. interest in the region, which is obvious. So in that sense, India-Pakistan relations, and by extension Kashmir, and more broadly Gilgit-Baltistan, so forth and so on, that's going to occupy a fair amount of policy space for those that actually focus specifically on the region, on India and Pakistan more broadly. But no, I think that one goal of the Biden administration will be to increase cooperation with India, not just bilaterally, but also multilaterally. I think that there's a desire for the U.S. to do more together with India in some of these forums, these global forums, whether you're talking about the climate forums or whatever the case may be. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the U.S. and India to partner in multilateral settings and not just bilateral settings.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, Hassan sir, and Machu sir. Sir, I have a question actually. So once I just a research paper for a very prestigious international journal on terrorism, and a very esteemed scholar who is the editor of that paper, he said that, well, I'm interested in a very particular issue. I asked him what. He said that, well, I want to know about the aspirations and how this very slowly radicalization penetrated through the society in the Indian Kashmir, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and the China occupied Kashmir. Okay, this whole illegitimate annexation or no. So I knew fairly reasonably about what happens in our Kashmir, but I had absolutely no clue about what's happening in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And the term China occupied Kashmir came as more or less something very vague and something which we hardly hear of. So my question is that why our academia, maybe government has its own compulsions of strategic thinking and all, but why has our academia, our civil society has more or less remained silent on this particular part of it? I mean, we sent glorious interlocutors, who certainly spoke about negotiating or dialogue processes with the local stakeholders, mainstream parties, Hurriyat and all, but never spoke at length about what Jamaat-e-Islami is doing or this chapter of Dark Hour of 1947. I've been to some really great places in Delhi, like my education, but I never heard these stories. So what do you have to say about it?
Are you asking me,
I
Vinay?
mean, anyone, both of you, I
Yeah.
would say, yeah.
Let me say this. At the end of the day, India's greatest strength, and perhaps some people might see it as a weakness, India is not a revisionist power. It's quite satisfied with the status quo. It's not built empires. Um, it's not claimed other people's territory. It's not even claimed its own territory. So even some might argue that even what happened in Simla was that India, Mrs. Gandhi and Bhutto had agreed to a settlement around the status quo. And that reflected India's strategic culture, which is not of one of aggression, expansion, or invasion. Now you might say, well, that's wrong thinking. You need to expand, you need to revise borders, you need to have borders which reflect the contours of your strategic policy. You need to have access to the Wakhan corridor. Imagination, if you let your strategic imagination run riot, then you can always think of things we could do. Now, you're telling me about Chinese occupied Kashmir. Now, all I knew about it was what Nehru had said in Parliament, not a blade of grass grows in the Aksaitin area. So I don't know whether what we are included in unless you're including Tibet or the Uyghurs within China occupied Kashmir, you can go back into history. But I think fundamentally India's strategic culture is inward looking. It's defensive, it's satisfied with its borders, more or less. It doesn't want to expand, it doesn't want to be an empire builder. Even when India had gone the Cholas into Southeast Asia, much of it was through soft power. Where you'll go into Siem Reap and see what's happened, or into Bali in terms of Indian culture being presented there. That was much more in terms of ideas, whether it was in terms of Buddhism or Hinduism or other kind of cultural manifestations. There hasn't been an occupied country or a country which is occupied by India for any time that you look at history. Where can you find Indian occupation? Even in the mythological confines of the Ramayana, Ram came back to Ayodhya. He didn't occupy Lanka. After defeating Ravana. So there isn't even that sensibility within us. Now, you might say it's wrong. We need to change our strategic culture. We need to be more grand strategic in our designs. I'd agree with you, but that just answers your limited question in terms of why academia. Because academia is part of the same cultural baggage that we have inherited. It doesn't paratroop from a different world or a different planet. It's part of our civil society. It's part of the same thinking. I think, but General Hassan would probably talk in terms of whether the Indian Army or the military, in terms of its grand strategy, has had an expansionist view of India.
Thank you, Dr. Amitabh. But Abhinav, I will request you in 30 seconds once again to put your question in a more cogent way. What exactly are you looking at?
Yeah. So I'm saying, well, maybe government has its own strategic compulsions. That's perfectly fine. But especially in the academia, like in the research, I mean, we have not come across these stories, these sides. I mean, especially what Jamaat-e-Islami did, or the 1947 invasion story, the massacres which happened. I've met many representatives of the Sikh community in Kashmir. They have their own stories. So what's yeah.
So what Dr. Amitabh Mattu was talking on was absolutely correct in the sense he was talking of India's strategic culture, and that's what you're actually referring to. I have a slightly different point of view from you, Amitabh, in the sense I engage a lot with academia, led by people like the great intellectuals like Dr. Amitabh Mattu, and I have great respect for them. I think what has happened in India is that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and research available in academia. We have just not bothered of actually integrating the academia with the strategic community. We don't consider them as a part of strategic community. The strategic community in India has come to be occupied entirely by the diplomatic corps and by the Indian Army or the Indian Armed Forces. Period. That's what it has come to be today. And of course, add-ons with intelligence agencies, etc. I have always been of the opinion, civil society, the academic world, the corporate world. I have done almost 50 talks in the last 5 years to corporates, primarily to promote strategic culture, because I find there's a tremendous takeaway from them. They have a very good understanding, the integration of economics, the integration of various other corporate activities into the parts of the corporate culture of the country. So I would not blame academia. I would rather say that it is up to us and very largely the political community, the diplomatic, military community, etc., who have come to occupy the strategic space, mainly the strategic culture space of India, is for us to actually draw the academic community out. Let me tell you, if I at one time suggested very strongly to the government that one of the things that is the biggest weakness in India is our strategic communication, our ability to put our views, our story, exactly what you are dealing with today, our ability to speak our narratives to the world. One of the weakest things, this is one of the weakest links that we have today. Why is it? Because we don't have academia integrated with us. If you have the research community, the research world and the academia better integrated with this with us out here, you will find that you'll have far greater advice, far more alternatives. We look at everything through a very, very narrow prism. And that's the reason why what you are observing is actually true.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So we have one last question, and this question is from Mr. Sanjay Verma. Just please let me find the question. Yes. So it's what's the roadmap and timeline to reintegrate Kashmiri Pandits in the valley? Hello.
Good. Dr. Mattu, like to take on that first?
Yeah, very happy to take on that question. I don't know what is the timeline, because I'm not privy if there is a timeline which the government has arrived to. But in terms of a roadmap, I think I'm one of those who actually believes that it's important for Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Pandits, and Kashmiri Muslims to live as they did for centuries together, rather than create separate enclaves. I think that will be the real test for sustainable peace in Jammu and Kashmir, when you can create the conditions where Kashmiri Pandits can live with honor and dignity with Kashmiri Muslims, as I said, they did, as neighbors, as fellow workers, with a relationship of interdependence. Kashmiri Pandits were often the teachers for Muslims as well. So I have a much more idealistic view. I genuinely believe that it is possible, through measures from civil society as well as assisted by the government, to create that climate of reconciliation whereby Pandits and Hindus, Pandits and Muslims and Sikhs can once again live together in harmony. I think a balkanized Kashmir Valley where there are separate enclaves who are not on speaking terms is not really a way forward, not a way forward for the long term in any case. You might need them as a initial rehabilitation or for initial relief or to provide employment and opportunities. But ultimately, I think the real challenge for India, and that means every Indian citizen, civil society, academic, the armed forces, the government, the agencies, is to help recreate and re-establish that. And that will be the biggest slap in the face of the idea of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mattu. So yes, we come to the end of our today's discussion, and I would like to thank all of you, Ata Hasnan sir, Mattu sir, Michael, and Mir Junaid sir. Sir, before we end, if you want to give any concluding remarks, please feel free to give. Okay. Any of you, Michael, would you like to say anything?
May I give a?
Yeah.
Okay. If I before Michael, can I come
Sure.
in and only speak for a minute
Sure.
to
Please.
just reinforce what exactly Dr. Amitabh Mattu just mentioned? I will reinforce that, and I'll say that creation of an artificial system of bringing back the Kashmiri Pandits would be the worst thing possible. It's not going to give you any dividends at all at the end of the day. Remember, the other way is something which I have always been suggesting wherever I've been speaking in Kashmir or in Jammu, and that is the fact that there is today between the Kashmir segment and the Jammu segment, there is a complete gap, a schism between them, looking in two different directions, opposite directions. Can we do something by which we get the two segments to start sitting and looking at each other with a little bit of a more positive sentiment with each other? Otherwise, this 30 years of bitterness which is there is not allowing the next generation to even hold hands or even to sit together, understand each other. I think there can be very, very simple methodologies. The army keeps doing the Sadbhavana of sending out tours all over the country with the Kashmiris to tell them the aspirations that they should have about India, etc. I think the better thing at the moment is to send out a lot of tours from Jammu to Kashmir and from Kashmir to Jammu to understand each other's culture, and sit together once in a while and smile at each other, have a cup of tea together, have a cup of coffee together, play a game together with each other, and do some business together. Perhaps that will contribute ultimately in the long run for the return of the Kashmiri Pandits in a more positive way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to let General Hasnain have the last word. Really interesting discussion, and I wish I could have been here for more. Important issues and very wonderful, distinguished speakers. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. So, and I would also like to
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
So I would also like to thank all our participants, and we'll be back with one of our next webinars very soon. Thank you so much for supporting.